Good day, my students. Welcome to the first section of Chapter 10 in 7th grade. We're going to be discussing a new political party in power, because the Federalists have been defeated in the election of 1800, and the Democratic Republicans will be taking charge. Now, the Federalists had supported John Adams for a second term, with Charles Pinckney as his vice president. The Republicans had nominated Thomas Jefferson, with Aaron Burr as his vice president. Now, at this time in the United States, it was considered improper for a candidate to campaign for themselves, so their supporters did most of the work. Basically, the idea was it was unseemly. It didn't look good. It looked like you were grubbing for an office if you campaigned for yourself. Many personal attacks were made on both sides. Now, voters in the presidential election, even today, do not actually vote for the president. So if you were to go into the voting booth and you were going to vote for someone to be president, you're not actually voting for the president. You're instead voting for groups of electors for your state. These electors from all the states are known all together as the Electoral College, and they actually elect the president and vice president. Now, at this time in history, in the election of 1800, each elector was expected to cast 2 ballots for president. The winner would become president, and the second place person would become vice president. So in the election of 1800, the Democratic Republicans won. But during the electoral vote, Jefferson tied with Burr, his vice presidential candidate for the presidency, because the Democratic Republicans each cast the exact same number of ballots. They cast 2, and they wanted to make sure that their guys became president and vice president. So, if you were one of the electors, you'd say, well, I want Jefferson to be the president, Burr to be the vice president. So my ballots are going to be 1 for Jefferson and 1 for Burr. Well, as you can guess, if you do this, that means there's going to be an equal number of votes for Jefferson and Burr. Now, the Constitution says when there's a tie in the Electoral College, which is what this was, that the House of Representatives will then decide who's the president. The Federalists in the House tried to keep Jefferson from becoming president by supporting Burr. For 35 separate votes, Burr and Jefferson tied in the House of Representatives until one Federalist decided not to vote for Burr, and that gave Jefferson the presidency. And then Burr became the vice president. To prevent this from ever happening again, the 12th Amendment separated the vote for president and vice president that was passed and then ratified by the states. Now, Jefferson believed that a smaller national government was better for the nation. He was one of those people who was afraid of a large central government, such as under a monarchy. He also reduced the size of the national debt and the size of the military. He limited the number of federal workers to just a few hundred people, which sounds kind of crazy today, but you have to remember the country was much smaller back then, too. His government got rid of most taxes and only collected customs duties, import taxes, basically what we call today tariffs. That's how the government was funded back then, was just tariffs. There were no income taxes. There were pretty much no other taxes. Now, the election of 1800 occurred in November, and Jefferson did not take office until March of 1801. Between the election and Jefferson's inauguration, the Federalists were able to pass the Judiciary Act of 1801. This act created a number of new courts in the system and justices of the peace to oversee those courts. Now, Adams proceeded to appoint as many Federalists to these offices up to the last hours of his presidency. Once he and the other Federalists realized they no longer had control of the presidency or Congress, they wanted to make sure they had as many judges to rule the way they wanted to for as long as possible. Adams' appointments became known as the Midnight Judges because he was working up into the midnight hours. Now, those people did not actually become judges until their official paperwork was delivered. So imagine I've got a piece of paper on my desk that says one of you is going to become a judge. And I go home and because it's late and nobody's up because it's like midnight, and I just leave the paper on my desk. You're not technically a judge until those papers get delivered right into your hands. And that became an issue. After Jefferson became president, he found a stack of these appointments on the desk. They were finished, but they were not delivered. Now, Jefferson's new Secretary of State, James Madison, yep, the same James Madison who's the father of the Constitution, Jefferson told Madison, do not deliver these papers, which denied these new justices their jobs. So, Marbury, one of the men who did not get his job, asked the Supreme Court to force the Secretary of State, Madison, to deliver these papers. Marbury was pretty upset. He was promised this judgeship. The paperwork went through. He was appointed. Everything's good. And then at the last minute, it's like, no, you're not a judge because we didn't deliver the paperwork. The court said it did not have the jurisdiction to do that. Marbury argued that a law passed by Congress in 1789 gave the Supreme Court the authority to order the president to deliver these papers. So the court ruled in this court case, Marbury versus Madison, that the law Congress had passed in 1789 violated the Constitution and could not be enforced because it said that Congress could not give new powers like that to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court did not therefore have the authority to do this. So it said that this new law was unconstitutional because only a change in the Constitution could give the court that power. This case established the power of judicial review, declaring laws unconstitutional for the courts. Judicial review puts the court on the same power level as the other two branches of government. Congress passes laws, the president can veto laws. Congress can override the veto. The Supreme Court can declare laws unconstitutional, throwing it back to Congress and the president. It's a major part of checks and balances. And that is the end of this lecture.